Hi, I'm Riley Moynes, author of The 4 Phases of Retirement and its sequel, The 10 Lessons. We're speaking with people who are squeezing all the juice out of their retirement, people with widely divergent backgrounds, experience, and expertise, people with stories that can inspire and encourage you too to squeeze all the juice out of your retirement. Thanks for joining us for today's conversation. Here we go. My guest today is Robin McKee. He's a longtime resident of Hamilton, Ontario, where he worked for many years at the local TV station CHCH-TV. During his working career, he was involved in several civic, historical, and museum-related activities. But perhaps the most interesting of these is a series of free public tours he offers entitled The Stories in the Stones at the Hamilton Cemetery. We'll talk more about them in a moment. About 15 years ago, Robin was stricken with throat cancer and underwent 4 surgeries along with a regime of radiation and chemotherapy. In April of 2018, he suffered the third of 3 strokes that, for all intents and purposes, have left him blind. Yet he continues to lead his cemetery tours, continues his civic involvement, and get this, continues to be interested in photography. Robin, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you very much.
Looking forward to our chat. Let's start off, if you would, with just tell us about your time at CHCH-TV and some of your experiences there. You spent a long time there.
Oh, it was a wonderful career, 31 years, and I met politicians, I met the prime ministers. I put mics on everybody, and I realized that they were just people doing their job, just like I was a person doing my job.
Right. And your specific responsibilities there related mostly to audio, is that right?
Yes, and what it was is that how I explained my job was that if you didn't hear it at home, it was my fault.
Okay. Now, after your career at CHCH, tell me, if you would, what's some of the background that got you interested in your cemetery tours?
Well, I've always been interested in history. I had a very good teacher in high school. I still contact him, Mr. Rossi from Port Colborne. My history teacher pushed me into writing essays. And I went to McMaster University. That's how I came to Hamilton for history. There was no money in history, so I went into the media, went to Mohawk College, and took a course there for television broadcasting, and then in 1978 I was lucky enough to get a job at CHTV because they were expanding a third crew for the Maple Leaf hockey games, and I was in for the next 31.
Now, these stories in the Stones, you have 12 themes that you've developed over a period of time.
Yes.
There are a range of them. There's the Masonic tour, and there's the art crawl, and there's the firefighters tour, and past mayor's tour. But you have a particular interest, or you got some favorites. So I know that there's the women's tour, and tell me how that one came about.
Well, most of the history that is buried in the Hamilton Cemetery, because I see the Hamilton Cemetery more like an underground museum where all these stories are buried, and you just can't dig them up. You need to actually tell the stories. So I go to a stone, and you can see the name, the birth date, the death date, but it's the dash in the middle that's important, and that's the story in the stone.
Right.
So I go and talk about this dash. And everybody gets the dash. That's your life story. Yeah. And so when it came to the women's tour, it actually came up as a complaint because I'm talking about Victorian men, and I only had one story here and one story here that pertained to the theme for women. And so why don't you do more women? Well, they're very difficult to find a story for a Victorian woman because the society at the time did not consider them people. And so I put together the women's tour and launched it for the Women's Year when the suffragettes and in Canada, the women got to vote. So I launched it only, I think, 4 years ago. And It's been very popular.
Yeah.
And as a little joke that I do is that I launch it in May for Mother's Day, and then I also host it on Labor Day, because if it wasn't for women, none of us would be here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now these tours are all free. People can just show up, and what kind of numbers do you get? I know it must vary, but is there an average kind of size of audience when you present the tours?
Well, it depends on the weather and other events going on, but
sure.
That's not a problem for me. I show up. If someone shows up, I go. You show, I go.
Right.
And even in the rain, I have umbrellas for people who want to come out and do it in the rain. I'll do it in the rain, rain or shine.
Rain or shine.
And the passion there is these people want to hear something. I have the facts. And I'm actually teaching people their local history. Sure. So that is the benefit of people coming out, and for me and them, that what I love to hear is, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is the way of doing it. And so when it comes to numbers, I don't think there's a big number.
Yeah.
When I launched the War of 1812 tour, I had 120 people come out.
Wow.
And it was big. Yeah. And just last week, I hosted the 1812 tour again, and 54 people came out. So it still got legs.
Yeah.
And I think the average, and what's more comfortable, is 20, 25.
Yeah.
That way it makes it more personal and one-on-one.
Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the War of 1812 theme. You've mentioned that a couple of times. I know it's one of your favorites. Say more about that one.
Well, the War of 1812, I wrote that for the bicentennial, which was 1812. Right? I have a joke like, when did the War of 1812 take place? It's kind of a non-Canadian war, but it's very significant in the Niagara area and Hamilton. The high water mark of the invasion of the Americans was Stony Creek right here in Hamilton, and people. This goes back to my vision and my perception of the world, is that people see the cemetery as a cemetery, but they don't see what it was prior to it becoming a cemetery in 1850. Prior to 1850, it was a British compound since the War of 1812. There is a fort in the cemetery that has been preserved because it became a cemetery. And in 1867, that's when it was turned over to Canada by the British. And so the Heights, Burlington Heights, was a fort in the War of 1812. And that's where the Army marched to Stony Creek to stop the American invasion.
I see.
So the pivotal battle of the War of 1812 in Hamilton is Stony Creek. Yes. It saved us to be Canadians.
Right.
If it was a frontal attack on the Burlington Heights fort, we would be Americans today.
Yeah, interesting. Now, you also offer one that's called the Civil War Tour. That seems perhaps slightly out of place here in Hamilton, but it's not. And
it's not at all.
Tell us about that one.
The Civil War, I've always been interested in Civil War. During the centennial of the Civil War in 1961, they put out Civil War cards. So as a child, I did not collect baseball cards or hockey cards. I collected Civil War cards. That's pretty odd, right? But they were really interesting cards. They were non-PC today because they had a lot of blood and gore. Yeah. But on the back, they actually wrote it like a newspaper, and they explained to you what took place at that battle. And I read those as a kid, and I collected them all. That started my whole career in history and Civil War and made it more interesting for me because I started wondering, why is this so interesting? And I found that 50,000 Canadians went to fight in the American Civil War. And it was illegal for them to do it because they were British subjects. They became basically mercenaries. Well, when I got involved in the cemetery and wanted to do Civil War, I found 28 Civil War veterans buried in the Hamilton Cemetery.
Wow.
They were all Canadians. They lived their lives here in Hamilton. They died in Hamilton. They were buried in the Hamilton Cemetery. And 3 of them turned out to be Black Civil War veterans. And that made it even more significant for our social identity, is that 3 of Hamilton's American Civil War veterans are Black.
Yeah.
And the connection goes back that far to the Black history in Hamilton.
Interesting.
So they're all Canadians, they're all Hamiltonians, and it's not American history, it's local history.
Right. And I'm sure that's a real eye-opener for a lot of people who just have no concept.
And I have a great story about Nelson Stevens.
Tell us.
No, he was one of the Black Civil War veterans. He was in an unmarked grave. I found him, and I went to Washington, D.C. I held his enlistment papers in my hands. Wow. It was signed by an ex. He was born as a slave in Lynchburg, Virginia. He came to Canada, and in 1865 he crossed the border, signed his death warrant by signing up, and he fought in the Civil War. Mm. He came back and lived and died a pauper.
Wow.
Yeah. I got a stone from President Bush to identify that man.
Oh, wow.
And that stone is now on his ex-unmarked grave.
Wonderful.
Great story.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. You also enjoy doing the Disasters tour.
Well, it's kind of a misnomer about calling it enjoy doing it. But the idea is that the disaster tour is that there's been a lot of problems in the world with 9/11 and that kind of stuff. And so I looked back in time to see where other so-called disasters took place. And they are, the big one here is in Hamilton is the Desjardins rail disaster. It happened in 1857, and 59 people were killed. And so there's a misnomer that those 59 people are in a mass grave. Well, they are not. So I try to change that mindset into facts, and the idea that they are all through the Hamilton Cemetery where the victims are buried. And so the idea that drew out of the other disasters, and there's fires, there's drownings, that they go down to individual disasters and family disasters and train wrecks and stuff like that. So the idea is that I actually do explain to people how they met their demise. Right. And it's not glorifying their death, it's honoring maybe the unsafe ways of change in our society. Right. That because these people died, we're safer today.
Right, right. I know that about this time of the year you have a Remembrance and a Veterans tour as well.
Yes, it's November, and we do a Remembrance Day event. I'm the only guy in Hamilton that has a private Remembrance Day event in the cemetery. I invite people to come to the Lost Monument. And the Lost Monument, I know exactly where it is. Again, another misnomer. And it's not a lost monument, it's a forgotten monument. Right. It's the very first cenotaph or monument to a veterans grouping of burials. And this is in 1890s, and people would come to the cemetery to honor those men that were buried in that grove. And now, with World War I, our whole society changed, because a lot of the men did not come home. They're buried in Europe. Right. And so the society had to change because the family did not mourn the individual anymore. The idea is that the whole nation mourns and remembers all the veterans of all the wars. So we went from the cemetery to the downtown core to our cenotaphs in all the villages and cities and towns across the nation. Right. We now mourn all veterans. Right. And so the Lost Monument is forgotten.
Not lost. Robin, I know that you had some challenges in getting these tours underway. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the trials and tribulations that you experienced on the way to where we are today?
Well, the tours have developed into a tourist destination. I'm actually on TripAdvisor. I thought that was pretty cool, right?
Good,
right? Somebody wrote up, go to these tours on TripAdvisor. It's kind of neat. So at the beginning, people did not understand exactly what I was trying to accomplish here, and that was to teach people local history through the dead guys that are buried in the Hamilton Cemetery. Right. And so there was a little mindset of, it's not a tour guide area type thing. Mm-hmm. And so, there was the idea of, well, what actually are you trying to do? And I explained, and they thought that was a good idea. So they gave me the go-ahead, and that was 18 years ago. And since then, I've had to, at one point, rent the cemetery to do a tour and pay insurance to do the tour. And now the city has come around, and they are very supportive of what I do, and they expect me to do it next year, right? And so it's a wonderful experience when you have what are you doing to when are you doing it?
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Nice.
So it's a good mindset change.
Sure, that's great. And you've been at it for 18 years.
18 years.
As you say.
And I do it for free.
I know you do. That's a labor of love for sure.
Well, yeah, and I believe what it is that wow factor that I said is that if someone says, wow, I didn't know that's satisfaction.
Yeah, I'm sure. How do people come to learn about the tours?
Well, I don't have any money to advertise, so I get free advertisement with the Spectator. They've been extremely good to me with that's the local newspaper here in Hamilton.
Yep.
And they do articles on me, and they put me in Too Good to Miss and advertise free events type thing. So I get that. I have a website that I have, hamiltonhistory.ca. I also, The View here in Hamilton, which is an entertainment for young people going out for bars and dinner and stuff like that. They've been very good to me with free ads. Local newspapers, community newspapers, they do free ads for me.
Good.
And and now with the city seeing me as a tourist destination, they actually do the brochures for me, but they don't put my contact on it.
Right.
But they send it out to all the tourist departments.
Good. Well, we'll provide your personal contact here in just a couple of moments, but for now, people might be interested in making note of hamiltonhistory.ca. Now, Robin, in addition to the tours that you've been doing for so long, I know you've had a kind of a long time interest in photography as well.
Yes.
But what was interesting to me was to learn that, notwithstanding the fact that you're legally blind and caused, I guess, by, as you've indicated, by radiation associated with your cancer treatment, you have just completed a photography exhibit at the local library.
Yes, that's...
Tell us about that. That's just unbelievable to me.
It was actually very good therapy, if you think about it.
Yeah.
I'm down to about 20% vision in my right eye, and it's very blurry.
Yeah.
But because of my background in photography, I think I got my first camera when I was 8 years old, and I disappeared in the family album because I'm the one that started taking the picture.
All the time, yeah.
So when that happened, I continued doing pictures and photographs and trips and what have you. And then when I went out on my own, I bought my first camera when I was in university. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to Mohawk College, part of the training was a photography course. Yep. And we had co-op at the time. I was hired at DeVasco Steel Company 2 years in a row in the photo lab. So I was doing corporate photography. Right. And then I got a job in 78, and all my vision went to looking at monitors. I put myself through college by doing weddings, and I was always a photographer. Yeah. So it's in my blood and my brain that I can take photographs, and I see the world probably a little bit more because I'm always very observant. I'm always looking. I'm always checking an angle, that type of thing. I should have been a professional photographer, but I'm not. I was just a hobby,
right?
And but it's also a love. I like to see if I can see the world with that's an instant. It's an instant. It's a moment that you would never have again.
Right.
It's you take the button, you push the button, you take the picture, and it's finished.
Right.
So one shot. That's all it is. One shot. It's think of it as a hunter, right? Taking down a bird in flight.
Yeah.
That type of thing. It's the one shot. You get it. And so when it came to the photography, the one shot that I got was I was in the Danforth in Toronto. I like Greek food, and it was just after the shooting in Danforth, and I was there to support them to get back on their feet and come back out. And so there was a commotion off to my side, and I didn't. Pardon me. There was a commotion off to my side, and I didn't know what it was. So I instantly put my camera, my phone. Yeah. I take all these photographs with my phone.
Wow.
Right. And I've stuck it over my head and just moved with the crowd and took photographs. And when I got home and could blow up my picture onto the computer, what I got was a photograph of Prime Minister Trudeau. He was visiting that day.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't know it at the time.
Right.
But it was a perfect shot.
Good
Perfect
stuff.
shot.
Good
There's and that I took to the library, and the library, I said, "Look at the shot I got. I got a VIP," and I paused and I went, "Buy a VIP, a visually impaired photographer." And the guy said, who was helping me with reading books,
right,
for my visual aid type thing,
yeah,
and he said, "That's inspirational, Robin." He says, "You need to contact this guy. Let's get you a show. How many do you got of these?" So I've made up a couple prints. I took them in, laid them all out. We had to pick which one they wanted to use, and there was 14 photographs that they put up for the show, and it was wonderful.
Yeah, indeed.
And then they asked me to do an inspirational talk reception. And I had to explain to people that as a visually impaired photographer, I still can see the world. And so I lost my sight, but not my insight.
Oh.
And so the idea is that this is how I see the world now.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful.
Call it art? I don't know.
Yeah.
Really? But I had the opportunity to do it, and I did it. And I take them all on my cell phone because it's easy. It's like an Instamatic, right?
For sure, for sure. Now I understand that part of the photographs that were included were ones that you took on a trip that you took to Egypt subsequent to becoming blind.
Yes, I have always traveled the world. I'm a traveler. That's where the photography comes involved, and I want to see the world. I want to see other societies. I want to see and live in their homes. I don't consider myself a tourist. I consider myself a traveler.
Right.
And so I've traveled the world on my own with people, but when it came to the stroke and losing my eyesight, a year later, I had to see the pyramids. As a historian, everybody has to go to Egypt. But it was imperative for me to go because I couldn't see the pyramids. And so I got an apartment right a block from the Sphinx. Every day I saw the sun rise and set on the pyramids.
Wow. Wonderful.
One of the photographs is the pyramid. I see a triangle.
Yeah.
And you can't miss them. They're really big. Right? And I think you can't get a bad picture of a pyramid.
Yeah.
It was a life-changing awareness. I had to go. Yep. I did. Good. I saw them.
Good.
And then nothing's impossible.
Right. Good for you. Good for you. Robin, I'm interested in hearing from you about how your involvement, let's say particularly with the cemetery tours, how is that meaningful to you? Like, what do you get out of it? Certainly the people who are on the tours get lots. There are aha moments and wows, but what's in it for you?
Well, I have a wealth of information that I've gathered over the years, and people say my house is a museum in itself because I collect Hamilton artifacts. Mm-hmm. So it's a vehicle for me to express the history that I see in Hamilton, and can tell people what they're unaware of. Mm-hmm. The facts of history can't change. And so you have facts that aren't taught in books, aren't taught in schools. And so I took it to the cemetery and found that this is the people that wrote this history. They didn't really write it, they did it.
Yeah.
That's the difference. There's a doing. They did what they did in their lifetime to leave their legacy for us today, and nobody knows about it. Right. And so I dug up their stories and put them on a tour and find a theme, find the story, find the thing that makes it a story. And that's part of history. It's story. Yeah. And so I brought it to the cemetery and the city. They thought it was a good idea eventually. And we now are telling the stories in the stones. And it's local history being told unconventionally. And so what do I get out of it is that people hear what I know. Right. And what's out there for them to know if they just look. Sure. And that's got to be very gratifying for you. Yeah, it's fun. I'm sure it is. I think it's fun. And if you can't have fun doing something, don't do it. Yeah, exactly. Right? Because every day is a holiday. Speaking of fun, one of the themes that we're working on in our podcast series is the idea of squeezing all the juice out of retirement. And my sense is that you're someone who really does that. But when you hear that phrase, what does it mean to you? Well, it almost sounds like you're going to end up juiceless, right? But I think we have all that juice in us, and it's endless. Yeah. And the idea is that it's always you get more juice by finding the squeeze, right? And so Gandhi said it to years ago, and he said, live every day like you're going to die tomorrow. Right. But he also said, learn every day like you're going to live forever. And so, yeah. That's what you're doing. That's what I'm doing. That's what you're doing. So if someone were to come to you and say, Robin, what would be your advice for me to squeeze all the juice out of my retirement? What advice would you give to that person? Do something. Do something you love. And go out and do it. Simple as that. Yeah. Dance. Cook. Bake. Whatever. Take pictures. Yeah. Whatever you think you have a desire to do and ability to do it. I had no background in restoring historical houses. Right. And so when I retired, I bought 2 of them. How crazy is that? And I restored each one of them by myself. When I needed help, I hired other people. Right. But the point is that I did hands-on heritage. And I've restored 2 homes, and they are now designated properties under the Heritage Act. Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. Well, that leads to this question. Robin, just do it. What do you have planned? What do you have planned for the future? What's next for you? Oh, well, there's no plan. Life is not a plan, right? It's an ongoing journey. Yeah. When something comes up and you think it's a good idea, just do it. Yep. So now when it comes to the photography, a photographer came to me and said, "Are you going to put out a book on this, on your art?" And I went, "Never thought of that." Yeah. And so I asked a friend of mine, a publisher, and he said, "Yeah, we'll do that." Beautiful. And I went, "Oh, so I'm going to get a book."
Good for you.
And one of the biggest questions that I have in the cemetery is, when's your book coming out, Robin? And I don't have time to write a book. Right? You've retired. I worked 12-hour shifts at CHTV. I don't know how I did this. Yeah. Right? And I was a single dad and had a farm. Oh. But the thing is that now I can't find time to write my book. Right? So what happened was that a friend of mine said, "Now that you've lost your eyesight and can't write and can't read, I'll write it for you." And so, no pun intended, I have a ghostwriter for the cemetery book. and what he did was he came out to the cemetery and he recorded my tours.
Yeah.
And he's transposing them, my words, on the page.
Great.
And editing them down. So hopefully next year at Christmas, I might have a book out on my cemetery tour.
Lots of balls in the air.
Yeah, yes.
Robin, thanks for joining me today. You can connect with Robin and learn more about the cemetery tours by writing him at Robin McKee, MCKEE, Robin McKee 3 at gmail.com, or by visiting hamiltonhistory.ca. Thanks again, Robin.
Oh, thank you very much for the opportunity.
I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation and that you'll join us again next time as we help you squeeze all the juice out of retirement. I'm Riley Moynes. Bye for now.